So we've been having a little conversation, and it's been a little bit about how things haven't changed, which really kind of leads on from our last discussion. But what else led on from our last discussion was common sense. Is it the dinosaur now? Have we lost it completely? Or is there still some bastions of common sensicality somewhere? Common sensicality, that's a good one. So what we're going to talk about tonight is common sense and where we find it, where we don't find it, and how could we inject it into, oh, there's the medical again. How could we inject it into our lives? And is it actually going to be useful if everybody else is on planet me? So let's do the honours and introduce each other. So, Willie?
Thank you, Leslie. Good evening. My name is Willie Nicol. I'm a former police officer, corporate security manager, and now I'm a personal development coach. And I help people to get the results they want if they're not getting them by themselves.
Hey, Mary.
I'm Mary Corbett, and I'm a coach who wants to spend her time seeing other people thrive. So when people get too swamped with stuff and they don't quite know where they want to make fixes, that's where I come in.
Really? Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela, and I help people work through whatever's going on for them, to put down the baggage, to realise what they actually want from life, to allow them to live their life on their terms, in their way, using kinesiology and coaching.
And I'm changing things up a little bit these days because I'm now an holistic culture consultant, which basically means giving a little bit of common sense, teaspooning it in there, and allowing people to understand that there are ways to speak to each other that perhaps we've lost, so that we can get goals and values right back into the mix. So guys, common sense, what does it mean to you? Floor's open.
Just as a reminder, the issue title is actually called Common Sense, a Lost Art, ? So I think that's quite a nice one to have that lost art piece on it. And I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge you and say I don't think it's dead. It might be on life support for a lot of people, but I don't think it's dead.
Well, I think it's got a lot to do with when you were born and how you were brought up. Because,
from your theory, you're telling me that I wasn't born with any because of when I was born.
No, I didn't say that everybody was bereft.
You should have died in the 70s.
I said we had a common sensectomy in the 70s. Which basically, it got cut out for some reason, and then we had the 80s where it just, hit the wall and went nowhere.
I think there's been a decrease in common sense, and a lot of it's to do with a generational thing. The way, as you say, the way you were brought up, the way you were educated, the circles in which you mixed your peers, friends, etc. But the old phrase, what will I do about this? And your father, mother, whatever would say, use your common sense. And I think most people had a fair idea of what that meant. So, for example, if you're going to do something, does it make sense to do this? And you think about it, no, it doesn't. So I'm not going to do it. But I think identity's got a lot to do with it now, that we have a culture where it's all about me. Right, and it's me, and I have a right to be offended, and so on and so forth. And the common sense, and as they say in Scotland, goes out the window. So, does it make common sense, for example, that a senior politician said it was perfectly all right that a woman has a penis? I don't think that makes common sense. So there's Angela laughing there. So it's they think, what, really? And whether you can do this or not do that, whether you can offend people, not offend people. Common sense is just, does this make common sense? And if it doesn't, why are we going to do it? So I think it's still there. I would agree with Angela, it's maybe on life support. So how do we, as you say, inject some common sense back into the common sense body to make it recuperate?
Yeah, I think you're right with the identity bit. What do you think?
I think there's loads of common sense around. I just don't think it's been labelled common sense. I think the language has actually changed. and that it's different. Because I know when I deal with people who are young adults, they're, you know, for me, common sense was always, is it practical? Is it pragmatic? Is it sensible? You look at people, yes, what they want might be very different. And there might be much more a me, what's my needs, my desires, my wants. But they actually go, does it work for me? And if it works for me, great. If I've yet to find, I find lots of young people who have loads of common sense, but they don't use the language we use. They're just saying, I'm minding my health, or I'm taking care of not working excessive hours, and I'm deciding I don't want the big promotion because I want the quality of life. They have lots of common sense in terms of being practical and pragmatic for their own well-being.
That's a self-care thing, though, isn't it?
But it's embedded in, to me, there's an awful lot of common sense in it for the individual, and I will agree from an individual's perspective. So I think there's loads of common sense around. It's just its format has moved a bit.
Angela?
I did a bit of reading around the topic before we started, which is very unusual for me.
Well, of course you did.
But no, I don't tend to bother. I normally leave that to you.
How many books are we into now?
Oh, we won't even go there. That's just embarrassing. But it was around the fact that, are we able to think for ourselves and make sound decisions? And I've been doing a bit of reading into digital dementia that I think I've talked to you about before, Leslie, and it was a term, I think it was coined in 2015, that's got the same symptoms as normal dementia. The only difference is it's reversible. But it's around the use and the rise of search engines and social media and 24-hour news cycles.
Yep.
So when we were in the pub, late 90s, I think I was legally in the pub in the late 90s. So when we were in the pub from the late 90s-ish, and we had conversations before everybody had a search engine or a web browser on their phone, you would have a debate. You'd have a discussion. You'd try and remember who sang that song. You'd try and remember that little factoid that something sparked. When that happens now, the first thing we do is say, let me search that.
Yeah.
Let me go straight to a search engine and I'm going to go and find out the answer. I'm not going to think about it. So have we got to that point that we're not allowing ourselves to think rationally, to think pragmatically through the entire start to finish story and get to that point where we've actually discerned what we feel is the right decision or the right answer or our standpoint on a topic because we've had that debate? And are we going straight to social media, search engines, news channels that are streaming 24/7 and getting our answer straight from there and we've not thought it through and we've not come to a conclusion using our own rational minds?
Yeah, because we've got the convenience now, and we are buggers for convenience now. Convenience, go to the shop and find something that's already been chopped up for you so you don't have to do anything with it. And actually these days, it's more like you're going to go and get an Uber thing to your door. So something to your door so you don't have to go out shopping because you don't have time because you've got social media to go on. We make time. We have the ability to make time for things. Unfortunately, we are worshipping the great God convenience, and the great God convenience is taking markers genetically off of us and de-evolving what we can do.
I saw a post on Facebook which showed pictures of oranges which had been peeled and were then put in a plastic wrapper.
Yep.
And it was about, I kid you not, saying, if only we could have thought of some way of preserving the orange without having to use plastic.
Yeah, because that's what the skin's for.
Yes. So what idiot didn't have the common sense to realise they come ready wrapped, mate. We don't need plastic round them. You go back to the convenience because someone's going to rip the plastic off and it saves them peeling the orange.
But also, do they know what a paring knife is?
Well, there's that. And I used to get quite a lot of delight out of peeling an orange because there was a certain art to it.
Yeah.
Same as peeling an apple. But the convenience part of it, and it's almost like, have we, as you say, have we lost the ability to think for ourselves? Have we lost the capacity for, as Angela alluded to, thinking, debating, arguing, whatever it is, instead of going to the search engine. Albeit I'm guilty of that when I can't get a crossword clue and it's driving me nuts.
And to be perfectly honest with you, though, the search engine sometimes has been tampered with and it's not the right answer.
Well, there's that too. And as I said earlier on, when my webcam packed up this morning, it was very handy to go on Google, find out there's a store nearby where I can go buy a new one. And an hour later, I was back up and running. But that was a convenience thing as well, because I could have ordered it off Amazon, but it wouldn't have come till Friday, which doesn't help.
But I think for things like that, that would the other option you'd go and grab the Yellow Pages back in the day, right? So you would have still had that at your fingertips.
But the convenience was that I could go online to Argos, push a button and say, right, that's it ordered, come and pick it up. Jump in the car, go to Argos, bring it back. So that the convenience is convenient in that respect. But I think that has taken away from our ability, our capacity for thinking for ourselves and having that discussion with other people. So we go online to social media. So someone on TikTok says, this is what's actually happening. And we think, oh, fine, okay. Not stopping to think, is it really? Let's go for an alternative point of view. That doesn't make common sense. So, okay, I'll take that as read because some bampot in TikTok said it so, and they've got 1 billion followers, so it must be right.
And interesting what you're saying about there, you went straight on, you ordered it, and you went and collected it. So you bypassed the checkout queue, where you may have spoken to somebody before or after you in the queue. You then didn't talk to the person on the checkout counter because you'd already done that online. And when someone then gives it to you over the counter, it's a very, very brief conversation. If that, they're just checking that you've got the right number and here's your receipt.
Yeah.
So you're losing that interaction and that social connection by not having I'm going to wander down to the shop and do the process the way it would have been done before. And it might not be meaningful conversations, but it would have still been some form of interaction.
Yeah. And I think, though, that what's really interesting is I think there is also, we're of a generation where we had that type of conversation in our youth. Then I see a difference in the younger people coming up. Yes, some of them are just going to social media, but more of them are actually choosing to have debate. They're actually choosing to say, well, actually, no, I want to challenge that. And they're still learning. So I don't think it's lost. I think there's still a sizable chunk of people say, no, I'm not going to believe what's on it because it's social media. They have a healthy cynicism and skepticism that I think some people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s actually don't have the same degree of cynicism. They see it more as expert. So I think there's different age profiles will have very different ways of interacting and engaging. And I think there is definitely hope that people's need to challenge and question is not going to disappear. And if that breeds good common sense, then we will not lose common sense.
I think we can teach it at school. Didn't we used to get taught that?
If as Mary's saying that generation has lost it in the 50s, 60s, 70s, does that mean that a vast swathe of the teachers have lost it? So how can they teach something that they're not?
Yeah, well, there is that.
Practicing?
There is that.
And I'm not belittling teachers. I'm just thinking from that demographic.
I was watching a program once, that Come Dine With Me thing, and one of them was a geography teacher, and she insisted throughout the whole program that Portugal wasn't a country because they spoke Spanish.
Do they?
Sorry?
They don't. They speak Portuguese.
Portuguese.
But this is a geography teacher. This is a person who's going into school teaching children wrongly.
I'm hoping that's not a sign of all geography teachers out there.
I hope so too. Yeah.
Mind you, they've got Google Maps these days, so perhaps they can find it but that way.
Only if they look up political map.
Here was me not using any brand names, and you guys had all just thrown brand names all over the shop.
But I think I think there are
search engines are available.
I think there's definite generational and age demographics differences in terms of what we perceived to be common sense and how we apply it and use it and how we've learned our common sense. I think there are huge differences.
Yeah, I saw an interesting thing today. I saw a little girl on a scooter in the road, whizzing away down the road, not even looking to see if there's any traffic coming, because she's so used to being quiet here. But what if some idiot comes round the corner speeding,
in an electric car,
and that happens? They do speed around here sometimes.
But in an electric car that you don't hear coming.
Yeah, yeah. But even at that, there's the earbud situation.
Yeah, or the person taking their mobile phone walks into a lamppost, which is very funny actually. But I think it doesn't make common sense to not look at where you're walking, mate. And you've walked into a lamppost, given us all a laugh, got a sore head, all because you didn't exercise common sense when looking at your phone and walking.
Drives me nuts when they do that with a dog.
Say again?
I said I used to read books and walk, so and actual physical books. So maybe I've just learned the skill of kind of looking up every couple of words.
Yeah, it drives me nuts when they go and take their dogs out and they spend most of the time on their phone. They're not even, associating with the dog, which is basically the reason for having the walk in the first place, apart from, the usual toiletry thing.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of parents who do that with their children as well. The kids are so used to seeing the parent looking into the phone and not paying attention to them.
But the phone the television used to be the babysitter, now it's the phone.
Well, it's both, really.
My wife told me a funny story about my stepdaughter who used to cry a lot as a baby. And I said, what did you do? I sat her down in front of the washing machine. I sleep in 5 minutes.
Dogs like that too.
Whoa.
I used to put my daughter into her dad's arms and turn on any rugby match. She was guaranteed to be asleep within 5 minutes.
that would probably work on me as well.
Yeah, it usually works on me. Well, Star Trek usually works on me.
Anyway, is common sense an art or not?
Well, if it's teachable, then it can become an artistry thing. But does that take it and lift it out of everyday thinking? Is it, I'm not arty at all, so I can't do common sense.
I don't think arty is necessarily means is to do with art or being artistic.
Could you be a common sense artisan?
Oh, okay,
I suppose, then. But
is it possible then that people would pay you to be a common sense artisan?
But that's what I say. I think you're taking that a little bit too literally from that perspective.
Well, I do that.
I know, and my thought is that the art of doesn't necessarily have to be a teachable artistic medium. It's not the same as painting or sculpting or other art forms. I think it's one of these things. I think it was a play on words really rather than anything else, is it not?
Is it not though? Because if you're sculpting out an idea using common sense, it could be that if you're not using common sense, that idea is not going to come to fruition. But if you're sculpting it out or drawing it out with common sense, it's going to become something that's not just a lump of thought process that might not be there.
Yeah, but I think my point, though, and I think possibly Willie's point as well, is I'm not convinced it's a teachable art. And I think it's an interesting concept.
Oh,
and I
think
get taught it for me, I don't think we are.
Well, we learn everything by watching what our parents do and what those around us do. And if we see, and one of the big things that they will say, don't touch that, it's too hot. So you start to make associations. So you understand what too hot is, and then it can make you. I'm just wishing that somebody had told me not to cross the road quite so often.
Also, when you're told something's too hot as you're a child, or don't touch that paint wet sign, what's the first thing a lot of people do? I'm going to touch that.
Well, in Scotland, we'd say to them, well, you won't do that again, will you?
I think if we use the word common as in this is common, it is the norm, it is normal, it is usual, it is part of the way we are. So if it's common, that means it's common to all of us. And if it makes sense, that's the common sense part of it. So as you say, Leslie, you look at your parents, see what they do, your siblings, your peers, etc. Think, oh, that looks like the right thing to do. That must be common sense. So I think there's a learning part of it where, yes, you learn it for yourself, and you may be taught it, like, don't touch that hot iron, right, or you'll regret it, or whatever. So there's a kind of two-way street here where you learn it by looking, or modelling, as we say in coaching, or imitating, and then you're taught it by people saying, that's not very common sense to do that, son. Don't do it. So I'm still kind of southern about the art thing.
And I think it's that ability to rationalize something and make that decision for yourself. It's the process of being able to think for yourself. It's maybe another way of putting what common sense is. That, yeah, okay, the last time I touched that, it was hot. I'm not going to touch it again. The last time I put my hand on that bench, it was wet. I might be a little bit more gentle before I decide to sit on it. I'm thinking things through rather than just going through life on automatic pilot.
Yeah, does it smell like wet paint?
There's other ways of checking.
Did that bird get stuck when it sat on it?
Oh, you could ask the late Queen, because everywhere she went it was wet paint, because there was a wee guy with a paintbrush 10 feet in front of her.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I digress. But it's like thinking for yourself, I believe, is a big part of common sense. And as Mary kind of alluded to, I think there's a lot of that being lost, thinking for yourself, because you go online, you look at TikTok, you go on SEOs, search engines, and you do this and do that, rather than saying, well, I'm going to work this out myself. How to make this work, how to grow this plant, how to, whatever it is, wire a plug or something. Or you go onto YouTube and look at that. I think it's a bit down to laziness, really, because there's an alternative, there's a more convenient, there's a quicker, easier, faster way of doing it. So we take, because we're lazy, we take the path of least resistance, and we do, like, I order my webcam and I go and get it, right? But so does that mean that the common sense bit has been either diminished or replaced by things that are quicker and faster and more convenient?
Where we don't have to think for ourselves.
We don't have to think.
That's just it. We used to be able to consider that we could say something and the person who was listening would realise what was going on and would, not take it so literally, like I did, by example, for the art of. But these days, people take things very literally because they don't understand the nuances of language sometimes. I mean, Mary, you and I both know, and Willie as well, and you, Angela, will know about, good crack, which is great conversation, and that's culturally here and where you are. That's what we do. We love a good gab, a good chin wag. But it's one of those things that these days we end up talking about the damn Kardashians or something like that, because that's the societal norm. That's the point of origin for a lot of people's. Oh, did you see what happened on the telly last night on Netflix? I watched this thing on Netflix, and people are, and I'm looking at them going, I don't have Netflix. Oh, you don't have Netflix? Do you have Sky? No, I don't.
You've got council telly.
Yeah.
It's also that point of good crack. Are you talking about drugs?
CRAIC, dear.
Yes.
I know, but I was making the point about you're taking things literally.
Well, yeah.
If people don't know that terminology,
I'm entirely sure that there is a story somewhere where someone said they had good crack and they almost got arrested.
But it's nice when people misunderstand what you mean by good crack.
Well, it is sometimes.
It is, but
conversation starter.
But I have great faith in humanity, and I believe that common sense will prevail, because I think that as people get so immune to the capabilities of the technology and less in awe of it, they will actually go back to doing it for themselves, because they'll get more wary. I've been fascinated at times the number of young adults, and I'm using young very generously, under 30.
Gen Z.
Gen Z, where they choose not to be on social media, or they choose which bits they want to pick in and pick out of, and you're going, and they're tolerant of other people who choose not to be on social media. So they don't react at all if somebody says they don't do Netflix. It's fine, that's okay, you do something else. And I'm fascinated by the fact that there's a lot of variation. So I think that's why I'm still hopeful that the common sense is that this technology that some of us go through phases have been somewhat in awe of, it's bland. They just use it. It's not part of it, but they still think for themselves. I think there's a huge mix, but I also think the quality of their education has a huge impact on whether they're thinking for themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's got to do with being taught to pass exams, not being taught to be educated.
Yeah. Has it changed from being taught to pass exams? Because I think that's been the status quo for decades, is it not?
Yeah, that's why we're in the trouble we're in.
But they still, like, you see, I have the Irish system. We would still have enough teachers in the system who would be encouraging debating clubs, writing essays as debates. So that has still, even though they're doing English, or whether they're doing it in history, or there's still scope. And it is a very flawed system we have in Ireland. I will happily put my hand up and say, yeah, our system is very flawed. And yet there are some strong components in it, which means that people do still think for themselves and do have more or less levels of common sense.
Scotland used to be known as the best education system in the world at one point. And then came the American style. And it went up the one.
We don't talk about football, religion, or politics, okay?
Yeah, I was trying to steer clear of that because it was very tempting, but I did steer clear.
Well, the thing about the common sense, right, is the opposite of common sense stupidity or willful stupidity. Because you sometimes see people do something and think, well, there really is no cure for stupid, is there? Right? Why on earth did you do that?
Well, they feed the Darwin Awards.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
I love the Darwin Awards. They're just amazing. However, there's also here comes a sweeping generalisation, the husband glaikit bit, where they pretend to be stupid on something that they don't know, so they don't ever have to do it again. Because you get fed up and then you just do it for yourself.
There's a certain high level of low cunning in that. Right?
I know.
I don't know how to do that, so someone else needs to do it. Right? But there was one thing that used to annoy me in my police career and my corporate security career, which is what I'd call willful stupidity, accompanied by willful laziness. Right? Well, I don't know how to do that, so I can't do it. Yes, you can.
Yeah.
Use your common sense.
That's kind of the viral mindset that started out. You know, I can't do that, so I'm not doing it. It doesn't exist to me. You know, I'll just do without it, kind of thing, unless somebody else does it for me.
That might not be
I had a 15-year-old. I had a 15-year-old who came in at work for work experience and was very upset when he was mopping a floor and not doing surgery. Because he thought work experience meant that he was going to be cutting an animal open. So the common sense ectomy that he had at that point was me telling him not to let the door hit his backside on the way out. And don't darken it again. Just don't bother coming back. And it's like, what, you know, how do you choose to believe? And he came from a good school, supposedly. How are you choosing to believe that you are going to come in here and I'm going to let you anywhere near somebody else's pet?
He's just made an assumption and not thought it through.
Oh no, he was like that. His headmaster apologised, grovelled to me the next day on the phone, saying, please don't not take another one because, you know, it's him. He's like that all the time.
That's what I'm saying. So it's just that one. It sounds like a lack of awareness, and doesn't have the ability to rationally think things through. I'm going to a vet. They do surgeries. Clearly, I'll help out with surgeries. So there's a piece missing from that rational thinking process.
Yeah,
but
there was an arrogance that went with it.
Perhaps, but there could also be a fear that goes with it. I don't want to look stupid by asking the question as to what this actually means. And I've made this assumption and I'm going to run with it. If I run with it and I don't waver from this thought process, then it's going to be right and nobody's going to tell me I'm wrong. So there could be a level of fear with that lack of awareness, lack of understanding.
A refusal to do something. It's like when taking a lump off of a dog's leg at one point, there was blood, and suddenly there was a thud behind me, and the person who was watching was on the floor. And I couldn't move, so I just shouted somebody and got them to kind of trundle them out by the heels.
But they may not have known that they had a problem with blood and the sight of blood.
You know when you've got a problem with blood. You also know that you're going into a practice where you're going to see blood. You're also going to see other things.
If you've not been exposed to it in that way, a small cut on your hand might not be a problem. I hadn't seen a lot of blood growing up.
It wasn't a lot of blood. It was like a cut finger.
But it's almost like, did you use your common sense going into that environment, right, knowing there might be some blood? As you say, Angela, maybe they've never experienced it. But let's say they had experienced it and still went, showing a total lack of common sense.
Or a lack of fear, or a lack of awareness of, I am scared of this, but if I say something, I'm going to look foolish.
Yeah.
So it's back to that conversation we've been having about psychological safety. If you don't
it was actually quite good. Because I said to her, if you're going to faint backwards, do not touch that green cloth. And she did. It was good. She did what she was told.
Was it a graceful faint? Just to kind of...
Oh God, no! It was a crumple.
It was a bump. Oh, was it? Okay.
It was a bump. I'm head down taking this thing off, and suddenly there's this boom, and I kind of, okay, hello, anybody? We've got somebody falling down now. Take it away.
Leave them there
because they're in the way.
Just step over them.
And then if they start to stagger up and they pull a tray over, we're done. Common sense. Nursing is full of it. Hopefully.
Well, there was the thing of tripping the colour or something like that. Boiling hot days, Scotch, and all these poor guys in these tight uniforms with these big bearskin hats on, and one of them faints, right? And they just trip the colour, they just walk over them, right? But it prompts you to think: does it make common sense to keep them in that full military kit when the temperature's 85 degrees? Because there's a possibility that they're not going to make it. They won't die.
They're like ninjas. They're supposed to be like ninjas. They're not supposed to be falling down on people.
The common sense thing is, I rant and rave about politics, and I don't know what to say about politics, but my wife says, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to start the common sense party. And my policies will be simply, does it make common sense to do this? And if the answer is no, well, I'm not doing it. Does it make common sense to do this? Yeah, it does. Well, then we get into the realms of who decides what the common sense is, right? But does it make common sense to, for example, rely on wind power and everything else when the wind stops blowing and we have no lecky? Right? No, it doesn't. In my view, anyway. Right. So the Common Sense Party coming to a political place near you. Watch this space.
I like that idea, Willie. It simplifies the whole thing to a certain extent, but it still comes down to an individual opinion, an experiential, subjective notion.
I think there's a kind of base level where I said common, norm, usual, if you like. There's a level at which people say, yeah, that makes sense. And if that's common sense, because we all commonly believe it, that to me is common sense. And if someone says, no, it's not, that doesn't make sense. Okay, tell me why it doesn't make sense. Let's have a chat about it. Right? But it doesn't make sense because I don't like it or I'm opposed to it. But no, you haven't answered the question. Why does it not make common sense? Because you didn't like it. Right? Because you are determined to have, and I'm all for wind power and renewable energy, and yes, but not at the expense where I'm now paying 3 times my lecky bill that I did a year ago. Right? Because that's not common sense. Yes, there are extraneous factors, right? Mr. Putin and Ukraine and energy companies. But
yeah, it didn't make common sense to sell them the gas pipes, did it?
well, no one thought of that. Listen, the guys making loads of money.
We did.
And they just...
But for the person that sold it, that made the loads of money, for them it made common sense because they were going to get a nice big check.
But the bigger picture, it didn't make common sense to the rest of us, and the majority. So anyway, soapbox, off it now.
I'm still going to stay in the corner of, I believe common sense will continue to exist. I do not think it's on life support.
Well, I think basically most of the animals have common sense, so you might be right.
I'm going to question, is there a link between common sense and trusting your gut?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
If you trust your gut and it works and you realize that that's what's happening, then actually you're using common sense to say, what's my gut saying? Does this feel right to me? Is this going to hurt? Am I going to lose at this? If I lose, what's going to happen? You know, so maybe we should do a thing on instinct, perhaps.
So, well, the next question was, is the lack of common sense actually a disconnection between trusting our intuition and our guts and listening to what our bodies are telling us?
Oh, crikey, you're going into Gabor Mate here. Yeah.
That wasn't my intention. It was
No, I know, but I get it because we are not in our bodies. We are somewhere looking at somebody else to see if they've got it right. And because they're on social media, they must have it right. So a lot of kids are actually doing that too, which means they're not identifying with themselves. And that's not common sense because basically it means that you're always lacking something. You're always seeking elsewhere for the answer. So there's an absolute disconnect between the feeling of understanding what happens next, the feeling of understanding that you have gut feelings, that you have a brain that will work that way. We just forgot to remember to use it.
Did they forget though? Or went away?
We don't. It's always there. But this is what we're doing, isn't it? We're reintroducing people to their instinct and to their well-being factors of you have the power to control this. You have more power than you think you have.
Have we drowned out that voice and told it to be quiet?
That's what I was talking about with the switching the markers off genetically.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have this thing in the corner, we have this thing in our hands, iPad, phones, the whole lot. And that's all we've taken everything from our universal mind that is jacked into the universe anyway, and is still sitting there, you know, like swinging its legs at the moment. Because, you know, like, well, what do you need me for? We're going to have smaller brains if we're not careful. We're going to go back to primal brains because we don't need all that thought and process because these search engines do it for us. But these search engines only show us what we look like we liked. They don't show us another different thing. We have to actually notice something different and say, well, you know, I'm fed up with that. Maybe I would like to see what happens over there. But we don't because we get into these routines and it becomes habit ingrained that we just look at this. That's where the truth is. That's where we get our news from. That's where we get this from. And it's feeding part of our soul that is giving it malnutrition, basically.
So it's starving it.
Yeah.
The thing about your
whole different
gut,
subject.
Your gut, your instinct, or whatever you want, intuition. Right, there's the premise that your gut is your second brain. Right. So does this? I'm going to do this. Wait a minute. Does it feel right? Have I got that sensation in my stomach saying, sometimes we ignore it. I've done it. Thinking, yeah, this is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Something's telling me, no, it's not. And you go and do it anyway. And your gut was proved right because it was a shambles. I think we've lost that. To some extent, lost that connection. And even in later life, I now stop and go, well, how do I feel about this? And if I don't feel right about it, I don't do it. Despite the fact my logical brain, and I'm quite a logical person after being in the police for 31 years, is telling me, yeah, I'll be fine with it. And then somebody else down there is telling me, no, it won't. So maybe that is common sense, is listening to that little voice, that inner voice, saying, Goni no day that, as we say in Glasgow. It's not a good idea.
I used to work for somebody who wanted to put a coffee machine, a drip coffee machine, on the shelf above the scales where we weighed the dogs to go into the thing. And I'm looking at him, I'm going, you really want to be sued, do you? And you really want to be doing it? And he's, why? What are you talking about? All it takes is one person to nudge that. It's over the dog, it's over the person, and you're going to be up to your eyeballs in lawsuits. And he looked at me and he said, do you think of these things? Why can we not just, I said, because your reference is that if it's never happened to me, it never will. And my reference is I'm a nurse and I've seen what happens. And that's not where you put hot coffee.
Again, that's down to your experience versus their experience. They've not experienced it, you have. So you've learned from it and you want to take steps to mitigate it. They've not seen it, so they've not learned from it, so there's no lesson to be learned.
Yeah, this is like what age was he then? Going on 50? And he'd been in practice for a long, long time, but it was, the smell of hot coffee was very good for the clients, and I'm like, I cannot stand the smell of percolating coffee. Don't do it.
So that's the real reason.
No, basically that was the reason that he appreciated more. I could work him.
Well, as Mary said, that maturity is no guarantor of having common sense.
No.
Right, so you get smart, common sense kids, 15, 16, and you'll get idiots like me. No, but you get people think, I can't believe that person did that. Surely they're old enough to know better. Right? And you think, well, that didn't work, did it?
Yeah, it's one of these things that's that it's always an ongoing situation that we just don't know what's going to happen or how it's going to work, or until it starts to crumble, disappear under our feet. And then we have to start thinking on our feet, because it's the only thing we've got to stand on, really, is our gut instinct, our common sense, looking at things and understanding how it works or not. So it's, I think, I think
nobody sets out to make a bad decision. So at some point, they don't set out to make a bad decision. They may make decisions that turn out to be bad, but they don't set out to make bad decisions. I've never met anybody yet in my life who set out to make a bad decision.
Unless they're deliberately sabotaging themselves.
Yeah, look at all these people who keep going for the same type of guy or girl or whatever. And they just keep repeating the same mistakes. It's like madness.
So on that one, I'll agree with Mary. That's not setting out to make a bad decision. There's other stuff going on there.
Yeah, that's not learning from experience.
Yeah, can we isolate it though? Can we isolate it can we get down to the little nugget of common sense that's there? Can we mind that?
I believe we can.
Like unobtainium.
Yeah. I think there's scope, and I think there's enough independent thinking going on in funny formats and in funny places, but I think there's enough of it. I don't think it's on life support yet. I think there is plenty of common sense around still.
Well, you can't walk into a store and buy a jar of common sense. Right.
Not yet anyway, but somebody's probably going to do it.
But it's almost like you can sense its absence by what's going on. If only that stupid person there could have walked into Tesco's and bought a jar of common sense, that stupid thing they did would never have happened. But it's almost celebrated in its absence. The common sense is, yes, listen to your gut instinct, looking about you, learning from other people, learning from your mistakes, learning from these decisions you made. You didn't set out to make a bad one, but it turned out bad, learning. So is it common sense basically is a learning process? That as you get through the process, some people do it quicker than others, and hopefully you get to a point where, yeah, my common sense is fairly well developed, and I no longer make these bad decisions or decisions that turn out to be bad, or do stupid things, or say stupid things, or treat people badly or whatever. So is it an evolving process, which is perhaps never ending?
Well, let's think about that and say that it is an evolving process. And while we sit and ponder the evolution of the process, we'll wrap up and ask you to what you would think common sense is like, where you find it, where you don't find it, and put it in the comments, perhaps. Let us know. Thank you and good night.